with Javier and Matthew once again. Thanks for tuning in. I'm really looking forward to today since my partners here have gone deep diving into the nature of jurisdiction to answer some questions that people have about the work that we do. And I'm going to be learning some of these things for the first time here as well. So I'm just going to be playing kind of the role of moderator, MC, and looking forward to passing some questions off to these guys as we get into the material. So Matt, I think you were going to take it and jump in. And why don't you take it away?
Yeah, awesome. I'm super glad to be here. I think today's podcast is going to do a lot of damage as far as destroying people's doubt. And that certainly was the spirit behind the creation of this document in general. People who come to this work, they hear about some of the amazing things that we're accomplishing by using common law express trust, and they can't believe it. I mean, it's completely outside of their ability to conceive of being possible. And so people hear about it, they're very fascinated, they want to understand it, but there's also this kind of hardwired programming that tells them that there's only two things that are certain in life: death and taxes. And we start telling them about what we're accomplishing, and it's just no way, they can't believe it. Doubt comes up, fear comes up. And so when Javier sat down to create this, it was in response to some of these entry level questions, kind of breaking down some of the complexities of the subject. I know anytime you're trying to learn something about the legal world, it's very intimidating because you don't really know where to start. And so I just wanted to say that I think that this document is one of the most powerful collections of information that have been put together on this subject. And then I also just wanted to mention that Javier did a video read through and breakdown of this document that can be found at courses.frontiercapitaltrust.com/findfreedom. And on that page, you can watch the video. You can sign up for our other mind-blowingly informative PDF called Principles of Trusteeship. And we have a link for our application there as well. So if after all this is said and done, your heart is telling you this is a big yes, I need to learn some more, head over to courses.frontiercapitaltrust.com/findfreedom, and you won't be disappointed about what you find there.
Awesome. Thanks, Matthew. That's an amazing intro. And, I wanted to make something that was grounded. There's a lot of questions, people that know law, people that don't know law. But generally, the tone is also in response to the times, because more than ever, people are experiencing their rights being infringed. They're asking themselves, how can the government do such a thing? How can a corporation? How is this legal? Who has the say? How can I protect myself, right? And this is when we have to get down to the core philosophies, the fundamental laws, the jurisprudences that allow us to kind of clear those waters and find where jurisdiction derives from, what you can do and what you can do to protect yourself, as well as be able to operate business at a completely different level. So this is not only showing you, jurisdiction, but we're also going to go into solutions, right? We're going to go and look at what will be a solution to the modern world operating in a reality that no one ever thought would be possible less than 2 years ago. But yet here we are. And luckily, I have two awesome friends that are joining me in this journey and making sure that we deliver what we can compile, what we can do together, or put our brains together and produce something that's amazing. So in response to that, who has jurisdiction? And to me, this is interesting that people are even asking this, because it lets me know how uneducated people are as to where that happens. So I'm not going to read through all of this stuff. Like Matt said, we have a video that goes through every little things. But Matt, if you want to, go through it, you said you were highlighting a couple things. Let me know what you think were things that are of importance here to basically touch on.
I would
Yeah.
also really quick, just if either of you wants to just give a very basic definition of jurisdiction, because people may not even have that awareness of what that even is.
I can answer that because I have jurisdiction here. And jurisdiction kind of depends on the context, but I give you a couple of them, right? So, jurisdiction, the power and authority constitutionally conferred upon. Um, this is excuse me, guys, or constitutionally recognized as existing in a court or judge to pronounce the sentence of the law, right? Basically, an authority that says, I can judge fact and I can judge law. And depending on where you are geographically, the way that you are set up business wise, administratively with your entity, depends on where that jurisdiction falls to. And so hopefully that answers. Matthew, if you want to add.
Yeah, so the way that I look at this is I like to give the analogy of the franchise as kind of a little symbol of how the corporate institution of government gets its authority over the legal person. And so it really has to do with this kind of natural law maxim that says you only have authority over that which you have created. And so, we like to say that the creator of all things obviously is the thing that created me and is therefore the thing that has authority and jurisdiction over my life. And so we've touched on before, I believe in the last podcast, that they had to create that legal fiction in order to apply that natural law principle to their corporate system. And, it is for lack of knowledge that we continue to enter into agreements with their franchise property and open ourselves up to their jurisdiction.
Ultimately, the greatest jurisdiction should be a jurisdiction that protects, life and liberty, and that includes property. And those things are addressed in a common law jurisdiction. These things are not displayed or even used in a different form of court, let's say civil Roman law court or court of equity. Property is not treated the same. It's treated as a debt versus in common law, it's something real that could be you. It's known as also substance. So we want to know, why is jurisdiction even relevant? Well, jurisdiction is what says, what law applies to you. So hopefully, Daniel, that gives a little bit of insight of, as to what jurisdiction is.
That might be the nugget with which people can really start to get a foundation for this. It's like what context makes what laws apply to you? What context gives those laws and the people that enforce them the authority? That would be jurisdiction. If someone has jurisdiction over you, I think another example I could use is like, the difference between a state trooper and crossing the state line. There's certain limitations of certain policy enforcers or government agents, etc. Let's say the district attorney of a certain county or a certain state cannot go and have jurisdiction in another state. That might be a very simple way to look at it. You are not authorized to perform or to enforce or to uphold law. And likewise, it's something that a person holding office can fill into, but also the important thing is the law itself is contained within various jurisdictions. So as we are trying to figure out what laws apply to us, how did people get granted authority over certain aspects of our lives, we have to look at jurisdiction. That's kind of the way I would explain it to somebody coming into this based on what you guys have just said.
Yeah, because everything starts with the why, right? It's like, well, why do we even have to answer that question? It's like, well, we never had to deal with this in the past because we weren't being invaded to this degree. But now that it has, it's like everyone has to tackle it. We have to, look at the letter of the law. We have to define these things and draw the lines, because these people are blurring it by, and these people being these foreign corporations. And, this document was in response to the mandates, right? The mandates to wear your mask, to be required to get vaccines. It's like, well, at what level are they allowed to do that? Or is this a contractual game? And this document goes into some of those nuances that will show you how we're being treated not like substance under common law, but as debt property, just like an object would be. And this is all happening in a commercial fashion. But what people are forgetting, right? And I just want to highlight this little section here. The rights of the individuals are not derived from government agencies, right? Despite what anybody is saying, like this, everyone is thinking the contrary at this moment. Whether that's media, social media influence, programming, I don't know, but they do not have that jurisdiction. It happens at a certain level, and this document kind of helps us know at what level they begin to, invade, but know to stand our ground that they don't have this. But if we don't have the education, we can't defend ourselves. We have to know right after asking the why, kind of the what and then the how. So either municipal, state, or federal, even from the Constitution, they exist inherently in every man by endowment of the Creator and are merely referred in the Constitution. So even in the Constitution, like even if it's said, it's still Constitution. It's based on something. So it's only reaffirmed in the Constitution and restricted only to the extent that they have voluntarily surrendered by the citizens to the agencies of the government, right? These are the sly contracts that you never knew you were part of. That's not common law. Every contract, from what I understand, you have to be there. You have to enter willingly. But you see, another form of type of entities are doing this. And so by educating us on the right things, we'll be able to know and defend ourselves at the right place at the right time. The people's right now are not derived. The people's rights are not now derived from the government, but the government's authority comes from the people. Quick note.
It kind of feels like we're pulling the sword from the stone here. It was like, this enshrinement of our liberties was like, put aside for such a time as this, that it would be needed. And what has happened is over generations, the slippery slope has incrementally moved at a pace at which people did not really realize the implications of how much we would lose, how much ground we would lose on our freedom that we once had. And now it's at a point where we are so born into a system that has gotten increasingly more invasive. And I think I might even have brought this up in a prior video or something that we've done, but I say this to people all the time, in which think about the Gen Zers that were born after September 11th, 2001. They are never going to know what it was like to just walk into an airport and get on a plane and not have to be scrutinized, body scanned, patted down. That is that is unthinkable to somebody who, let's say someone who passed away prior to the events of 9/11. They would not even be able to understand that. But as these things happen, as events occur that the government, for better or worse, uses as a justifiable excuse to move certain things forward in the name of safety. And we see this playing out to a very rapidly accelerating place right now. And so it's kind of like, I feel like we're pulling the sword from the stone. We're like, no, this is what the founding fathers left for us to understand our common law rights. Anyway, it's kind of like now we're realizing, like, we're reaching for that magical talisman that was left by our ancestors, to take up our arms again and reclaim that ground that has been lost.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add in there that the thing that Javier was reading from the document is a citation from a court ruling, City of Dallas versus Mitchell, 245 SW 944 from 1922. And so this is a pretty long-standing precedent that really kind of reinforces everything that we're saying. And it also reinforces what I said about the natural law principle that is reflected by these court rulings, in that every man, by the endowment of their creator, gets their right from that, rather than the Constitution, which just reaffirms it. Really, the letter of the law is to restrict the government. It's not to restrict the free people. And we've gotten so far away from that even saying that out loud sounds like heresy. But the frontier that we are on and are trying to map out and develop is that frontier where we are living as free living human beings under the authority of our creator alone. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and years ago, no one would ever had thought that you'd had to know all these things. Like, oh, the United States is a corporation. Did we know that? Do we know the definitions of what we're actually dealing with and how they're getting jurisdiction? And now it's like, well, now we need to know. Now we need to understand what's going on. And why is everything being treated, as commercial activities? And a lot of it has to deal with what happened in, I believe, the House Joint Resolution in 1932, which introduced a new way of, say, dealing with subject matter in courts, in which they incorporated things like the Uniform Commercial Code in order to have their legislative power be the last word. This is what has basically taken place since then. And that year that act was enacted was the same year that the gold standard was removed. We have no lawful money, right? The lawful money was the only thing connecting individuals to the law of the land in common law. But since there is no more gold, then the definition of property changes, the definition of who has jurisdiction completely changes as well. Everything is defined as an interstate form of commerce. And the only way that, let's say, a foreign entity like the United States corporation, being a commercial entity itself, can gain power over a living person is through contracts, or by contracts that you don't know about, right? Equity contracts. And this is absolutely legal to do. But the problem is that we're not aware that these are taking place, and that we have the decision to not participate in those things. And we don't have the tools yet, right? A lot of people just didn't have the tools to how to deal with people in equity jurisdiction like the courts do, giving you a presentment, So they must prove an extraterritorial application of the statute in question. So whatever, your charges are, whatever they're trying to claim that you have to, act upon, there has to be a contract that says that you consented to this, but there isn't. And then that interaction ends up being something that 100%, like 99.9% of the people fail to acknowledge that is taking place. And so when we move into understanding how equity jurisdiction works, we start to see, things like trusts being used, and how trusts are being used to destroy basically people's lives. And these are not trusts that are common law trusts for living men. These are statutory trusts. These are trusts that are essentially built to undercut the person's ability to act for themselves and be treated as a victim and a beneficiary. Like, oh, you're a US citizen, you become a beneficiary. So these contracts have to be in place, and they don't have them, right? For example, the thing that pulls people to, let's say, be compelled to perform is only in equity. So that means that there has to be an existing trust of some kind that you had contractually agreed upon. The problem is that there is no written trust. It's a, let's say, implied form of trust that says, well, you're a person, but your person's receiving benefit from this secret trust no one ever knows about. And through that type of resulting literally invisible trust, every living man is subdued on paper and then presented to be basically, the death of the name of that person. And so the response to all this is knowing when and where, infringement can happen from another jurisdiction, and then what the solution is to all this. And so trusts will begin to become more apparent as a thing that is talked about in this podcast over and over again, because this is the main vehicle that is being used under common law to be able to protect ourselves as living men. because with these courts and all these individuals are doing, foreign entities, they're not addressing, I never had to think that I had to prove to myself that I'm a human. But now people all over the world are creating affidavits of statuses. Hey, I'm a living person. Do not treat me as this death fiction. And it's amazing that the sign of the times has only pressured and really revealed and sparked a fire in all three of us to be able to provide solutions for the exact things that are needed most, and I think more than ever nowadays.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time in laying this out because, as someone who's been interested in the common law for over 10 years now and picking it up piece by piece and being like, oh my gosh, I see the big picture. I understand how this is happening. They have created a bait and switch, sort of like through these contracts and implied consent and these natures of jurisdiction and gaining authority over parts of our lives they never should have. And when you try to explain it to people, they obviously, that sounds absurd, that sounds ridiculous. It sounds like oh, this is more of that nut job legal stuff, and I've seen people do that and get in jail, et cetera, because there's been such a campaign to distort the facts and say, when someone starts to bring up common law, they go, oh, that's that sovereign citizen stuff, which is a complete misnomer and a total bizarre way of presenting this, because and in the words itself, it's sort of like, oh, this person thinks they can be separate, because sovereignty implies independence and citizenship implies this jurisdiction and consent and contract. And so it really, when someone says sovereign citizen, they don't know what they're talking about, and that doesn't make any sense. But that's how they obfuscate and confuse the general public. They put someone in this situation who is beginning to wake up and is trying to advocate for their rights and advocate the consent that they've unknowingly given, and they don't know how to do that in the courtroom, or they don't know how to do that legally, and so they get in trouble. They walk into a game that they don't know how to play, and then they use that as an example. And then there's the first thing that people will find and say, well, look, this is what you're talking about. And this person got canned. And then you look into that a little bit. You look into the case, you see the nature, and you see the facts of the matter. And you and I and Matt are able to look at that and say, this is where they didn't, extricate themselves from the contract. This is where they took on personal liability. This is where they identified as a debt instrument. And we can see why it was that they lost. And unfortunately, in pushing the envelope forward, people have had to come via trial and error and make great sacrifices involving losing their rights or winding up in jail or having their assets stolen from them. To us now be able to say, look, this is what not to do, but keep pushing, keep looking into this, because if you actually get back to it, it's not some old wives' tale loony bin stuff. It's literally the reason why America was created was to protect our sovereign rights from our creator. And you can see over time how that edge has been, it's been an increase against us, and a smaller and smaller and smaller operational space where our rights have slowly eroded over time. And when you look at the big picture like that, it becomes very obvious to see what we're talking about is not just jargon, rumor or anything of that nature.
One of the things, and just to add, quickly to that, because that was well put, it's just like what we're doing is setting the standard. I mean, that's what I want ultimately for this to do, and we're trying to run a business. We're trying to put information as in order as possible with depth. And I think one of the biggest problems is that there is no standard as to who knows how to operate trusts? Who knows how, the legal fiction operates? Who understands common law jurisdiction? Who understands equity, and admiralty jurisdiction? Is there someone that we know we can talk to thoroughly about contract law and what that means, over common law, jurisdiction? There isn't. So I feel that, Frontier Capital Trust and kind of what we do is almost like quality control, because at least that people coming into this avenue can have a higher level of discrimination and going into this information and kind of more cautiously be able to pick and choose exactly what stuff to implement and what isn't relevant to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing too, is that, we've lived in this society of commerce and convenience. And so it has been something that our most recent predecessors, a generation of our parents and grandparents, you go to somebody else for that. You have to go back probably 150 years or more to find people like, in the immediate, following first two or three generations of the country who knew how to administer and manage their own legal affairs without the necessity of attorney. I mean, you can look at some of the quotes of the founding fathers. They hated lawyers. You know what I mean? I don't know if it was Jefferson or Franklin. I can't remember who the quotes are attributed to, but basically they were like, we don't want bankers and we don't want lawyers. Get out of our country. And now, because people will look to somebody who is considered an authority, we've got several generations of public schooling who has made us, look for that authority figure to proffer the answer for us,
officers,
and just tell us if we are correct or false. We don't know what that's like. And so you take someone who doesn't have the knowledge or the ability, like our parents' generation or our grandparents, and you say, look into this information, and they go, well, I'm going to speak with my attorney and they're telling me this is all baloney, BS. And, we've talked about this in prior videos and podcasts, which is, the attorneys are limited by statute. They derive their authority and their ability to practice via license, via statute. So no matter how you slice it, they play for the home team and they play by the rules of the game that they are aware of. So it really does, and it has taken in the past, since the invention of the internet, and those of us who care about freedom, a lot of independent research as people who are not necessarily studied in law to go back and make sense of this and learn how to apply it as an individual to bring these skill sets and awareness back into just common ability. Like, everybody should know how to do some basic maintenance on their car. Everybody should know how to maintain their home. Everybody should know how to grow some food. Everybody should know how to operate within the law and how to preserve their own rights.
Exactly. So I wanted to just provide, for those who are not looking at our video or our document up, it's, a definition of common law, right? It's the simple law of the land, general law of private property known in the British Isles, the individual rights to secure property. You enter the jurisdiction knowingly, voluntarily, expressing consent through the valid elements of a contract. And in a way, when I look at that, I'm just like, yeah, that makes sense, right? I thought, isn't this what everybody's doing? Apparently not. Everyone's operating through a different form of jurisdiction that's pretty much alien to what the founding fathers had put in mind. So, when equity jurisdiction and like the, what do they call it? The federal rules of the rules for federal procedure,
U.S. code,
when they started to implement that, the common law was lost, and this happened somewhere between the Constitution of the U.S. and then the states also having their own constitution. So to clear this up for the pros who are listening out there, right? The common law of the United States is the common law of England, adopted by the original Constitution of the United States, so far as not modified by any alterations made by the Constitution of the state at the time of the admission of the Union. It's very, very specific because they've made it so that we have to define exactly what this means. Common law was designed to secure rights of individuals to property, right? To make it difficult for property to be taken away. Just like Matthew said, it's like, we don't want government taken, but now we see it every single day. And so, and just to touch on the equity in this jurisdiction, you have presumed an entity, right, which is your legal device, and the implied jurisdiction connected to the creation of those devices. Easy way to remember equity, right? The navigation, business of commerce in the sea. Anything that has to deal with notes, bills, right? Commercial activity, this is equity. This is what everything falls under. And so that people are reminded, each freeborn sovereign has the authority and the right to deny and disavow all equity jurisdiction. That's what people need to know. Well, how do I do that, right? How do I navigate through these, this sea of commerce? I made 4 points. presence, right? Your physical presence is sufficient to acquire your jurisdiction, domicile, permission, or consent, and minimum contacts, which is, potentially other contracts that could be, another third party could potentially put you at liability, opening you up for their jurisdiction to come in. So these are 4 ways. And again, if you guys want to go through all this document, I highly suggest you go visit that video because I dive into everything here.
Yeah, courses.frontiercapitaltrust.com/find freedom.
So, and I'm not going to go through the who because we kind of touched on that in our last podcast, which is the personhood. So I'm going to skip through that, and I'm going to go through kind of the solution to kind of end this with, our solution and our services that we provide, right? We help people create irrevocable common law trusts. And so we're going to go through some of the information here because this is so far, a type of contracting that protects you from any commercial activity, because you can say you're straw man, you can disavow the legal fiction and all that, but then you don't have access to banking institutions. You don't have relationship to leverage the mainstream economy, which is very, very important to do.
I did want to add in something on the second page there. I thought there was a very succinct passage towards the end of the where, and this kind of pertains to, when you're getting into this, like, what are my rights? What is all this? And then you start hearing about trust. It's like, wait a minute, what does trust have to do with anything? And this little quotation here is brilliant for showing not only what the relevance of a trust is, how that trust is influencing your rights, but why the common law express trust is actually the answer to it. And so I'll read it real quick. The individual is treated as a beneficiary or negligible trustee of a classic resulting trust, in which the individual has no rights but privileges via the implied foreign jurisdiction. It is interesting to note that the taxpayer relationship by operation of law is that of beneficiary to trustee. It is a classic resulting trust. The taxpayer is presumed to be a trustee, hence he is legally obligated to report and make distributions to the party having a legal right to certain amounts pursuant to trust bylaws, i.e. the U.S. tax code. So that right there, it explains what's all this whole thing about trust, like why trust? Well, that's why right there. They have entered us into a trust agreement, made us the either a negligible trustee or the beneficiary, and thus are using that to compel us to perform. And so that also taps into why creating your own common law trust is a solution to a higher contract than what theirs is.
And so to continue, right? And again, another reason why, a general reason why you want to use a trust is because you are using your private right, you're exercising your private right to contract. But we're doing this in trust form, which ultimately is the most advantageous dynamic because there is a separation between equitable and legal interest. So by being able to use a trust, you can use all the afforded protection under the common law whilst being able to operate commercially just like any other corporation, yet even more advantageous, more protected with virtually almost no liability, unless, whatever that liability is your own at your own discretion and at your own will, depending on whatever your business is. So we're using this private right to contract under common law to create this trust.
Exactly. I really like the first paragraph there under corporate citizenship versus private citizenship. And I think I'd like to read it if we have time for that. So the first and fundamental citizenship of a person living in one of the states of the Union may have is with one state. The Supreme Court made it clear almost 80 years ago that state citizenship common law contract in the form of the Declaration of Independence, state citizenship is the fundamental citizenship in America. But how do we seek remedy to an imposing jurisdiction that uses implied abusive trust? Operate a private express trust, especially one created with proper care to its trust instrument, is a far superior method of carrying out any voluntary contractual organization between individuals sui juris. Man's right of contract is considered so fundamental that even under Roman law and its system of domestic slavery, all men, citizen or not, retain this fundamental right, ius gentium. And so that right there, it explains exactly why the trust is the solution to this problem.
So, without getting too deep into the subject of trust, I'll be covering what I think is the most significant to mention and address in regards to its authority, capacity, legality, and potential liabilities that pertain to the administration of the trust. A lot of it comes down to being able to know how to administer contracts. Our Declaration of Independence charges that America had been progressively subjected to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution. Therefore, it should be concluded that individuals may exercise their right to contract outside of the federal jurisdiction. It's absolutely legal. This is defined as of our own right, not under any legal disability. But apparently, people have forgotten they can use their own hands and a piece of paper to make something for themselves. So, express trusts under common law are a superior and distinct mode of administrations. And this is exactly why we help people be able to create a trust and also give them all the tools necessary to be able to create the most, standardized level of trusteeship that is completely competent and at his disposal has all the resources to engage in the most common forms of businesses and truly impenetrable. So without getting too deep into the rest of it, this section of this document goes into the impenetrable characteristic of the trust, in which if people are watching this and are looking at it document, if not get the document, watch the video, because I'm not going to go through this whole thing, talks about exactly the different statutes that are enacted in the laws of Florida, which are also given full faith and credit to all the different states, right? So the common law trust is specifically recognized in the laws of Florida and many other 49 states, and is recognized in all 50 under the full faith and credit. So it doesn't matter. You can form your trust in any single state that you want. So this also shows the versatility of the trust, including, the ability for international individuals to come in and be able to create a trust in the United States. Important point, a common law trust is non-statutory because this is a distinctive characteristic of statutory trust. So that means the common law trust does not depend on any statute, right? We're creating it out of our own will. No agent is doing it out of a statute dependent on a commercial transaction, right? This is not dependent on any of that state, federal government for its creation or existence. It is created and it exists by the will of people in its own private domain or realm, and conducts its affairs in private, right? It books, it records, like all of it is not open to the public unless you make it open to the public. And that level of discernment, we try to do our best in our coursework so that as, you go through it and mature as as a trustee, in your journey through trusteeship, all this becomes something very refined and something you're very, very good at. And all sorts of different business opportunities you'll be able to go through your own ventures once you have this trust set up. So trusts are recognized worldwide. Uniform Trust Code has passed in 25 of 50 states. And some form of a trust code has been incorporated in all state laws. It is easy to determine what a trust or the trustees may do or may not do. All this is evidence that shows that this is not some hullabaloo. We're not talking about a ghost. These are case points, case law, and we're looking at information here that can be applied universally. So, like I mentioned here earlier, we have a little mention of the HJ Resolution 192. Short touch on that here, because I wanted to get one clarity, because this is what got us into the contract. As a result of prearranging banking crisis, Congress passed H.R. Resolution 192. If you guys want to know what happened, how this all happened, how we became commercial debt, how we became legal fiction, this is where you have to go. Suspending the gold standard, which means they disestablished the fixed content of the gold dollar and took away the lawful jurisdiction of the US standard lawful money. In effect, the entire country, every state and freeborn sovereign individual became insolvent and was effectively put in bankruptcy, making it impossible for each state individual to either pay their debts at law or to be paid at law. This was a criminal act of usurpation of the sovereignty of the people by Congress. In conclusion, everyone was effectively forced onto the credit and of the private banks, the Federal Reserve banks, and the commercial banks that began to pass around their debt instruments as money making use of their debts claims to move jurisdiction. So they're using this dollar, right? And as it floats around, even by you holding it, they can put you under their jurisdiction. By using a trust, you remove that liability contractually, legally.
I think there's a big social geopolitical, understanding that might awaken for people who are aware of the situation with US foreign wars and the dollar as the reserve currency. Like, the dollar is the darling of the international bankers for now. They can crash that and shift over to something else at any point. But to understand that gold did not belong to gold did not what's the best way to phrase this? There was no jurisdiction held by any entity over gold. That might be the best way to say it. Gold belonged to everyone. It was not something that, again, we come back to this idea of jurisdiction. Well, what I have created, I control, I have authority over. So now that we're all on US Federal Reserve notes, we are under the jurisdiction of the entity that created that. So as long as we're using those paper monies, those US dollars, we are in some way using something that does not belong to us and has no real actual tangible value as we understand. They're printing it out of thin air. And so, that has implications in all of the way that this everything has become corporatized and commercialized. Now we're dealing with, instead of governments that are of and by the people, corporate entities that are top down because they have jurisdiction over the subject matter, over the material that we're using every day. And this is how, when we're looking at how did we get from the place where we had more sovereignty and more awareness and more freedom and we could administer our affairs to where we are now, it's because slowly they have been taking pieces off of the chessboard that are not under their express authority and control and jurisdiction. So we're only being allowed to play with the pieces that they're giving us, which means we have to play under their rules. So as we realize that we have this ability to create of ourselves through contract, to sort of create a commercial and financial bubble around us, that gives us some breathing room, that what is within the boundary of the bubble is under our domain through our implied consent and our contract giving us jurisdiction in a sense, and what is outside of it. So now it really becomes about, each one of us protecting ourselves and then pushing the boundary of our jurisdiction out, of our sovereignty and our freedom out against the encroaching boundary that has been compressing and compressing and compressing to the point where, they want to own everything, every man, woman, child, our bodies, our labor, they want to own it all. And so, these trusts individually create a release of pressure and a bit more freedom with one's personal experience. And, we haven't talked too much about the big picture yet. I think it would be great for the next episode to really talk about, let's have some vision process of what could this look like when trustees get together within their own sovereignty and then contract with each other. Now we're talking about expanding that bubble of protection beyond just one person into a community, into a group, into a family, into a town, into a city, and what is possible then. So, it's really important for people to understand, if we want to create a better world, how we fell from grace of our freedom to begin with, so that we can correct that and then push back against it in an effective way.
Yeah. One thing I'm just going to touch on, before we kind of wrap this up is, a short attention to the foreign agency known as the IRS, right? They're Their laws are akin to as a policy, and they can be combatant. They can be combated. You don't have to take, right? You can refuse their jurisdiction. They don't have power over the individual. And the only way that they do have power will be kind of cleared out here. And the way that a trust is used will be very revealing as to how this, let's say, dynamic of taxation is forced upon us, and that people even think that they have to pay taxes and live their entire life kind of in this fear, when in reality, if they look at the letter of the law, this is all a volunteer arrangement. And if you study trust law, this is what becomes very, very apparent. And then you start to realize, wow, I have much, much more power than I thought. Now I can move forward confidently, right? And Frontier Capital Trust is kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to here, this is where it is. Let me provide you the confidence. Let me get you the resources. This is where you look. This is the letter of the law that you can use to defend yourself and be able to become a more knowledgeable trustee. So they, right, the participants of, let's say you're a citizen. So let's just talk about all those people who are, believe they need to pay taxes. They're considered as a debtor and creditor in a Social Security association. That's why you find some people out there that use UCC law and know how to, let's say, navigate those waters, right, in their equity jurisdiction to avoid being treated as a debtor. Everything is creditor and debtor in the world of contractual law, right, in a Social Security association, because this is how it all started, right, from this 14th Amendment citizenship, whereby each person ensures everybody else in the association by agreeing never to demand payment for debt. It is under this volunteer arrangement that these persons become primarily a U.S. citizen, secondarily a state citizen, subject to Clause 1 of the 14th Amendment, while the literal 10th Amendment rights are forfeited. However, as it might stand as a beacon of organizational liberty, the IRS has a reasonable interest to make sure that express trust, example, do not violate compliance, right? So the IRS tries to shoot down, right? And they're like, hey, what can we do? And they try to look for, let's say, weak pieces of the chain. But if you have an express trust, right, that has no bearing on a properly created and administered express trust. It is well settled that a trust created by parties not availing themselves of such privileges and immunities is not illegal, even if formed for the purposes of limiting or avoiding taxes altogether. Nor is the express trust subject to federal excise tax imposed on corporations, nor is an express trust taxable merely because it possesses all the accessory powers possessed by corporations, right? These are all their refutes, the court's refutes, but the common law is well settled law, right? And in our coursework and the rest of our stuff, we teach you, we give you ways so that you can defend yourself. You don't have to go through the jurisdiction. And ultimately, like, this is the type of stuff that hopefully ignites a fire in each one of you guys to kind of go in there and start doing more research and compiling, evidence for yourself to be able to make the best decisions for your future, your business, your legacy, and your family. So, last thing here, membership in the unincorporated banking association, becoming an employer, employee, worker, or corporate entity deriving income from corporate stocks under the 14th Amendment, availing itself for any other benefits of public trust, invoking the doctrine of reciprocity. It has nothing to do with the IRS. And all of this are cases that are in reference to the things that were just mentioned. So, with that said, once people get this document, there should be no shadow, right, of a doubt that this is going to answer all your questions. If it doesn't, go ahead, continue the research, digest more of our content. We're trying to do as much as possible to get you guys as much free content as possible. So any form of exposure. So if you guys are watching this video, subscribe, like, if this ends up being in some social media platform somewhere, do your part to get this information out there, because if you don't take advantage of it, other people will. So closing thoughts, guys?
Yeah.
Matt, you go first. I have some thoughts, but I haven't heard from you for a while. So how about you go?
Yeah, I concur with everything that Javier said. I think that, as I said in the beginning, this is an extremely valuable resource to be put out for public consumption. We'll see how it gets treated by the algorithms and such. But
Yeah.
what we can do is, if you come across this organically, just start following our stuff. You can go to courses.frontiercapitaltrust.com/find freedom. And that is a great little page for getting up to speed and getting more of our information. And you can even fill out the application and get in contact with us. You fill out that application, we reach out to you and kind of explain what your situation would look like by converting from where you are over to a series or to your trusts. And yeah, we really appreciate everyone who is finding their way to this work, because it's been our experience that only people who have been through the fire to some extent are even at a place where they're ready to entertain this stuff. So if you do come across this and this is lighting a fire in you, I'm happy to be in the same circle as you, and I look forward to meeting you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would like to just put out, an emotional and big picture appeal to, we've just illustrated the slow but rapidly increasing encroachment of outside forces against our own personal liberty. We cannot, beg, plead, protest, or hope or wish that this outside force, whatever it is, wherever it comes from, whoever's involved with it, whoever supports it, is going to stop its direction, which is to encapsulate, enclose, and basically extract the human resource that is us. Financially, our labor, our resources, our property. We know, and we don't get too much into it, but I'm sure people who enjoy our podcast know the Klaus Schwab, you will own nothing and you'll be happy. Our antithesis to that is to open source the Rockefeller playbook and the Warren Buffett, and to own nothing and control everything. This force, whatever it is, call it evil, call it egomaniacs, call it globalists, whatever you want to call it, is not going to stop trying to push, encroach until it has everything. So for the people who have been, fearful or concerned, or, yeah, I get it, it's in the law, but that doesn't stop corrupt people from doing whatever they want to do. There's only two ways that this can go from here out: is that we allow that encroachment to continue until it takes everything, or we begin to fortify, to expand our own knowledge, to expand our own abilities, and to push back and to reclaim that freedom that has been slipping away. So I would really like to, if we can, I don't know, I can't say for sure that the next episode will be about big picture stuff, but if you guys are open to that, I would love to start talking about what I have seen and what I'm starting to see, as to, now that we've helped people with this for a number of years, what the power of these empowered trustees coming together can really do for the situation that we're in, and what it could really pave a way to a much better world that is equitable and just and free. So I just want to leave people with that sentiment that, yes, we run into people come into this information and get a little bit timid or meek or afraid. There's only two ways that this is going to go. So take up the sword in the stone and empower yourself with the information and begin living the freedom, so you can prove to yourself that this does work. And we're more than happy to lock arms with you, as Matthew said, and stand with you. So thank you guys for listening. I appreciate you, Matt and Javier, for your time. I think this was another very successful episode of the Frontier Financial Solutions. So thank you both.
Yeah, thank you, man. And yeah, I totally agree. I think a big picture episode coming up after this one would be perfect, par for the course.
All right, guys, we'll catch each other on the next one.